WLRN edition 117 in 3, 2, 1.
I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Sisters, rise again. I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Rise and rise again.
Greetings, and welcome to the 117th edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, January 8th, 2026. WLRN wishes you and yours a very happy new year, 2026. The 10th year WLRN has been in operation. This is Jocelyn, a 41-year-old radical feminist who believes that male violence is the most egregious problem on the planet, particularly concerning manifestations of sexual violence against women and girls. When not writing about radical feminist topics, Jocelyn enjoys yoga and building community with like-minded individuals who are sick of patriarchy precluding us from having nice things. This month's edition focuses on feminist curiosity within the context of examining the terrible truths of women's exploitation and sex trafficking with our guest, Cynthia Enloe. We'll hear an interview Lola did with Dr. Enloe, a groundbreaking feminist thinker whose writing uncovers the hidden ways women's lives shape global politics. A professor and author of classics like Bananas, Beaches, and Bases, and The Curious Feminist, Enloe examines militarism, tourism, diplomacy, and global capitalism through a feminist lens. Her work invites all of us to take women seriously and to follow our feminist curiosity wherever it leads. We'll also hear a commentary from Lola, so be sure to stay tuned till the very end for that. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's Cat Bradfield with women's news from around the globe for this Thursday, January 8th, 2026.
On January 1st, the Chinese government removed tax concessions on contraceptive products as part of efforts to increase the country's declining birth rates. Condoms and contraceptive pills now incur a 13% tax in line with other consumer goods. The new law also includes tax exemptions for childcare services and expansion of national health insurance to cover the cost of giving birth. There are concerns that this could lead to reduced accessibility of contraception, with Michigan sociology professor Yun Zhao stating that the brunt of the negative effects will be borne by women, particularly by disadvantaged women. As well as financial enticements, there have also been reports of the government tracking the menstrual cycles of Chinese women in order to pressure them into having children, with women in some provinces receiving calls from government officials asking about the date of their last period and details of future childbearing plans. On December 6th, authorities in Iran arrested 2 people involved in the organisation of a marathon held on an island off the country's southern coast. The arrests were due to images showing women competing in the marathon without hijabs. The marathon took place on December 5th and attracted around 5,000 runners. The local prosecutor alleged that the event, quote, was held in a way that violated public decency, end quote, due to laws requiring women in Iran to cover their hair and wear modest, loose-fitting clothing in public. The magazine Marie Claire Brazil has named a trans-identified male politician as its Woman of the Year for 2025. Erica Hilton was elected to Sao Paulo's municipal government in 2020, and in 2022 he reported women's rights advocate Isabella Sepa to police for referring to him as a man. Sepa faced up to 25 years in prison for her comments and was able to secure refugee status in Europe in 2025. Hilton's persecution of Sepa and threats to take legal action against other feminists were not mentioned in his profile in Marie Claire, which declared him, quote, one of the most influential voices of her generation, end quote. The announcement of his selection as Woman of the Year was met with overwhelmingly negative responses on social media, with a post by women's rights organisation Maitreya criticising the decision receiving more likes than Marie Claire's original post. Hilton was also included on a list of inspiring and influential women published by the BBC in 2022. Norway's largest women's health organisation has seen an increase in the number of women reporting abuse at the hands of their partners, leading up to the rape trial of a member of the royal family. The son of the Crown Princess is due to face court in February for 32 charges, including 4 counts of rape. Staff at the Women's Health Centre say that media coverage of the case is helping to break taboos and lower the threshold to ask for help. French First Lady Brigitte Macron is facing a lawsuit for describing feminist protesters as stupid bitches. Macron made the comment in a discussion with actor Ari Abitan, whose theatre performance had been disrupted by the protesters due to rape allegations against him. Lawyer Juliette Chapelle, representing the feminist groups filing the complaint against Macron, told French radio that she's France's First Lady, her words matter. Chapelle criticised Macron, pointing out that she appears to be very engaged in causes for women, but in reality we can say there's a disconnect between her public speeches and what she really thinks. On December 11th, Austria voted to ban headscarves in schools for girls under the age of 14. The ban was proposed by the country's conservative-led government and has drawn criticism from some, claiming it will deepen societal divisions and further marginalise Muslims. The parliamentary leader of the Liberal Neos party defended the ban, stating that it is not just an item of clothing. It serves, particularly with minors, to shield girls from the male gaze. It sexualises girls. The ban is expected to come into effect from September, with families facing fines of up to €800 for repeated non-compliance. On December 10th, the Danish Parliament reached an agreement allowing the Greenlandic women forcibly fitted with IUDs between 1960 and 1991 to claim financial compensation. The agreement entitles around 4,500 women to each claim the equivalent of $46,000 from a reconciliation fund, with applications for compensation to open in April this year. To qualify, the women will have to provide a credible report of the incident, must have lived in Greenland during the qualifying period, and declare on oath that they had no knowledge or consent of the procedure taking place. Denmark's health minister said that the compensation cannot remove the pain from the women, but it helps to acknowledge and apologise for the experiences they have gone through. On December 8th, Scottish nurse Sandy Peggy won part of her employment tribunal against NHS Fife over being forced to share a changing room with a trans-identified male doctor. The tribunal upheld Peggy's harassment complaint against the NHS, but dismissed her claim against Dr. Beth Upton. Allegations that Peggy experienced victimisation and discrimination under the 2010 Equality Act were also dismissed. Peggy has announced her intention to appeal the dismissals, as well as pursuing action against NHS Fife's management, senior medical staff and her trade union, which she claims failed to support her when she was suspended. On December 2nd, Girl Guiding UK announced that biological males will no longer be permitted to join the organisation. The announcement comes as a result of the April ruling by the UK Supreme Court that references to women and girls in the Equality Act refer to those who are biologically female. This ruling has led a number of UK organisations to rewrite their policies, not out of a sudden respect for women's sex-based rights, but instead to avoid legal repercussions. The decision by Girl Guiding was welcomed by feminists, with Maya Forstater calling it the right thing to do, and denounced by trans rights activists, with some volunteers resigning in protest. The US state of Tennessee has created the country's first register to track repeat domestic violence offenders. From January 1st, anyone convicted of more than one domestic violence offence will be registered in a public database maintained by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Tennessee is consistently ranked in the top 10 US states for domestic violence-related murders, and the law creating the registry is named Savannah's Law after Savannah Puckett, a Robertson County deputy who was shot and killed by her ex-partner in 2022. The partner had a history of domestic violence and stalking. The law is not retroactive, meaning that offenders will only be included in the database if at least one of the convictions takes place after January 1st, 2026. On December 9th, world number 1 tennis player Aryna Sabalenka stated in an interview with Piers Morgan that she believes it's unfair for women to compete against biological male athletes.
Well, that's a tricky question. I have nothing to do against them, but I feel like they still got huge advantage over the woman. And I think it's just not fair to a woman to basically face like the biologically man. And then it's, it's not fair. Like the woman been working the whole life to reach her limit. And then she has to face like a man, like which biologically much stronger. So for me, I don't agree with this kind of stuff in sport.
The interview featured Sabalenka alongside male tennis player Nick Kyrgios to promote their Battle of the Sexes match, which was held on December 28th and won by Kyrgios 6-3, 6-3. In early December, a group of female MPs in Japan submitted a petition for more female toilets in the parliamentary building to reflect increased representation of women in parliament. There are currently 73 women in the government's lower house and only 2 toilets adjacent to the main plenary session hall, leading to longer queues before plenary sessions. The entire building, completed in 1936, contains 67 male stalls and 22 female stalls. The petition was signed by 58 women from various political parties, including the Prime Minister. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for this Thursday, January 8, 2026. I'm Cat Bradfield. Share your news stories, announcements, and tips with us by emailing info@wlrnmedia.com and letting us know what's going on.
You are listening to WLRN.
That was the Zohra Orchestra, an all-female Afghan orchestra, playing Jama Narenji. Next up, we'll hear excerpts from Lola's conversation with feminist scholar Cynthia Enloe, whose decades of work challenges us to look more closely at the hidden power structures that shape women's daily lives.
Since 2016, empowering women to be the media and reclaim the narrative.
Your grassroots community radio station.
By women, for women.
WLRN. WLRN.
WLRN.
WLRN.
Welcome back to our show, Cynthia. It is such an honor to be speaking to you as a young feminist scholar. I am truly very honored to have this opportunity.
Well, it's lovely for me too. It's a real conversation. That's the best.
Within the academic space, you've really been a formative thinker for feminist international relations. So to start the interview, I'd love to hear when you first began writing about militarism and sex and global politics. Did you ever imagine your work would intersect so deeply with tourism economies?
No, I didn't, Lola. I started out not being interested in gender at all. This is really embarrassing, but it's important to say. I was a undergraduate political science major. I loved political science, but it was political science, what people would call kind of old-fashioned now. But in fact, of course, I learned a lot. I went to Connecticut College when it was Connecticut College for Women. Then I went to Berkeley, and Berkeley was University of California at Berkeley. And Berkeley was considered the hot, political campus. But in fact, there was no, as in zero, interest in women. Zero. So while 1960s Berkeley sounds very lively, and of course it was, but there was no feminist consciousness. There were no feminists on the faculty of political science or any other department, really, very few anyway. And so at that point, what was new for me and stretchy and good was that I was becoming interested. I'm a New York suburban kid, right? And so what was new for me was getting to know Southeast Asian politics. That was very new to me, and I loved it. And so I really became what they now call a comparative politics person. I wasn't international politics, I was comparative, which meant I compared the politics of the Philippines with the politics of Japan, the politics of Japan with the politics of China, the politics of Vietnam with the politics of Malaysia. That's comparative politics. And I loved it. And it was all new to me. And it was only, Lola, it was only after I got my PhD when women's studies as a field began to really blossom. But before that, which is the good news about women's studies and now women's and gender studies, is that first came the second wave of international feminism. And I first really got excited about this whole new way of thinking about political life and about the world from activists, especially in Britain and in the US, but also I became interested in Chinese feminists and Japanese feminists. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know anything, because I had studied and I dove pretty deeply. I'd studied mainly men in politics without, you know how it is, Lola, without even noticing I was studying men. So I didn't ask about masculinities. Nobody that I knew asked about masculinities, all kinds. And so really, I did know a lot. I mean, not enough. I was pretty ignorant, but I felt as though I knew a lot about different countries and parties and movements and constitutions, all kinds. But in fact, I only knew, I don't know, a tenth of the story. And so I became interested in international politics. And this is the good news. I became interested in international politics I came in the door or the window or the back door of comparative politics. So I always knew from the start, I've been taught from the start, don't ever make the US your norm. Don't ever make the US or the UK or France, don't ever make them the most interesting country on the block. And for an American as myself, that's a really good inoculation. Because if you come from a powerful country, if you've grown up and gone to school in a powerful country, when you do discover or become more curious about international politics, you oftentimes carry with you the presumption that your powerful country is the most interesting. And that's deadly.
And on your point about decentering the US, and I felt like that very much related to your point also of realizing within the field of political science, oh, I've really just been studying men. And in my undergraduate career, I took an introduction to political philosophy class. The whole syllabus, as you can imagine, was male authors. And we were learning about, politics, right? But it was about men.
Yeah.
And in order to
without being curious about the men.
Yes, exactly. And so to learn anything about women, you had to take a feminist political theory class instead of, having them be together
everywhere.
Another concept that I find very interesting, especially prevalent in Dubai, is the hierarchy of racial identities within the sex trade.
That's true in many countries that have made profit-seeking sexual exploitation, a source of usually not only but male-controlled business, and that is that what they do. These are businessmen, and it's like deciding. I mean, it's not like deciding. I shouldn't trivialize it, but it isn't. They don't treat it differently than what kind of sneakers do customers want. Customers that have 3 kids and have to really economize, and they want these kinds of sneakers because their kids grow out of them fast, and they don't have much money to spend on sneakers, as versus the sneaker buyers who think they want to be, buy only Air Jordans or, really high tech. And they will have a hierarchy of not just sneakers, but of sneaker buyers. And you're right. Now this is you and I both, we should make really sure that our sentences are never in the passive tense.
Anytime I talk about my subject, sometimes it's debates, sometimes it's casual, more like scuffs, because I use the language of prostitution. While in academia now, everyone says sex work.
No. So you tell me why you use the word prostitution rather than sex work.
I say prostitution.
I agree with you.
I say prostitution, and I say prostituted women.
Yep, me too.
Instead of prostitute. And I disagree with using the term sex work because I don't see selling of sex as work, because I don't see money as a valid form of consent. And I think that it normalizes it and it puts it within the capitalist economy. And I don't think that one can sell their sexual being in that way. And also the fact that it erases the everything we know about prostitution, right? Prostitution is a word that has a lot of weight to it. And when we say prostitution and prostituted women, we realize that it is an industry that profits off of the bodies of women. And I am very against the normalization of it and seeing it as a valid or a normal or a form of labor in which women just happen to choose because they decide
they could have been like electricians, but they decided to be a sex worker. I remember when the phrase sex work began to be used, and it was by feminists, and it wasn't 1920s. It was in the late 1980s. In other words, it has a history, that phrase.
Yeah.
And it was used especially at first by Dutch feminists. And they were thinking about what was going on in Amsterdam at the time. And it began to be picked up by other feminists who thought that, as you've said, the word just prostitute was demeaning of the women who were in the exploited industry. Now, here's the thing. And this is a question for both you and me and all our colleagues, how can one make sure that one uses language, in whatever language you speak, that is itself respectful, not of the perpetrators, but of the people who are being, as you say, prostituted? How can you be respectful and not cover up the violence and the exploitation going on? And I found that, because I, of course, work with a lot of people in different countries that use and prefer to use sex work because they think they're being polite. They're being respectful. And I'm conscious of that. I try to learn from it. But I tend to say women who are in a sexualized profit-making industry need to be part of investigating which of those women are accurately called sex workers and which of those women are accurately called women in prostitution, Which women, and that means feminist investigation. If one finds that there are women who are not subject to male violence and are not exploited for their bodies and control their own sexual interactions with mainly men that they think of as customers, that takes investigation to find out all three of those. Then perhaps the most accurate term for those women is sex workers. But you have to investigate. It's not just about, I'm going to name it this to be polite, I'm not going to name it that. It's not about politeness. It's about accuracy. But that means having to investigate. And what you could say, you yourself in this investigation, I will keep my ears and eyes open to the possibility that some of the women whose lives I'm trying to better understand might be accurately called sex workers in Dubai. But I'm not going to assume it ahead of time. I'm going to be curious. I'm going to be curious as to where exploitation happens, to whom, by whom. And on the basis of what I find in my investigation, I'll use the term sex workers when it's accurate, but I don't assume it. I was going to say, one of the first not the first, but one of the first studies in the 1980s of how men in the trying to make money off the prostitution industry, how men got women under their control, which is always a question in the prostitution industry. How does anybody who wants to exploit a woman get a woman under their control? It's called debt bondage, and it's by Human Rights Watch. I'm almost sure it's Human Rights Watch. And I used to use it in class because a lot of us don't realize that getting, in this case, a woman into debt is necessary in order to sexually exploit her. And that one has to be interested in, if you will, the patriarchal manipulation of debt in order to understand how these Ugandan women came under the control of this money-seeking, misogynist man. So debt is not something that a lot of us know how to study. We know about our own debt, but to think that studying debt enables one to understand how prostitution has become an industry. There are other ways to get women, for men to get women under their control. There are also women who get other women under their control for the sake of, quote, procuring them internationally. There's evidence of several Nigerian women who figured out how to recruit and then get other Nigerian women under their control for the sake of international trafficking. But debt is not something that many of us know how to study, and we better learn.
Human trafficking is one of the most lucrative industries, more than arms dealing, more than drugs.
Well, it depends. It depends which humans are trafficked where for the sake of whose profit, right? So one of I'm not saying that prostitution isn't made profitable. It's not automatically profitable. It's made profitable. but that trafficking of young boys, oftentimes called camel boys, to work in certain countries for pittance is another kind, current is another kind of human trafficking. Trafficking women, even if they're not prostituted, trafficking them for very, very low-waged domestic work is another kind of human trafficking. Today, 2025, there are several different kinds of human trafficking. One has to say curious about, are there any differences between who's trafficking where for whom? But certainly prostitution for sex exploitation is one of the high profits for, and you have to ask for whom? For whom? Who in the chain makes profits? Because the men and some women who are the procurers, who are the handlers, who are the first rapists in the chain to demoralize and weaken a girl or a woman, they may not make as much money as the procurer or the exploiter at the end that deals with the wealthy men.
And so when you think about this chain and from your own perspective and research, where does the state fall into that? And what role does the state play in sustaining the sex tourism industry? Is it more about some sort of like active facilitation, strategic silent, regulatory neglect?
You probably know this both from Dubai, but you also know it from your study of Thailand so far. And that is from what we know from activists and from researchers and from investigatory journalists, like the BBC journalists. The state is never monolithic. I tend not even to use the state, that phrase, because it makes it sound as though there's an actor and the actor acts. Whereas oftentimes, well, there are two main sets of masculinized actors. That is, people in jobs that usually require being male to get the job and to keep the job. The first is customs officials. Customs officials at the borders, either in the airports or on the truck routes or on the train routes. The customs officials are the ones who, if they wanted to, if they cared enough, they would stop the trafficked women right where they found them, in the back of a truck, crossing a border. And they are paid off often by the procurers enough so that they think it's worthwhile to not pay attention. And how they convince themselves to not pay attention, to take a bribe, to think it's worth it. That, to me, that's really interesting. I just don't think they're evil people and you don't have to be curious about them. I want to know, how did you turn off your moral sense? How did you not think about your own sister? How did you decide your job as a customs official had no moral compass? How'd you decide so that you'd take the bribe and keep taking the bribe? So the customs officials, which are a pretty highly masculinized government jobs, is really, and the second is police, and that tends to be local police. So we know this a lot from both the customs officials, but also police officers who tend to be men, not always. We know this from Thai and Burmese investigators, feminist investigators. And they have found out how they get paid for not arresting the procurers and the pimps and the transporters. So those are two sets of many thousands of them around the world, state officials. And I never call them just the state, but it is true that they're acting on behalf of the state. And they have the authority of the state. And then I'm always curious, I'm sure you are too, I want to know about their superiors. So maybe their superiors never do take a bribe, but they know that their subordinates at the border are not really doing their job. Or they know that the lower ranking male officials are not really investigating the disco to find out what's going on in the back room. So how come those superiors, who are usually men, they represent the state, why do they decide to not care and not invest and not be a good superior? How come? And as I say, they're very particular local feminists who have studied this. I know people have made me aware, particularly of Thai feminists and Burmese feminists, particularly in the Shan states where there's a civil war, who have studied this. Places of disruption, which is from natural disasters, from wars, from famines, and from droughts. They produce vulnerable women because of the way patriarchy operates after a hurricane or a tsunami or in a civil war, right? But that's not how you create a profit-making for the controllers. That's not how you create a profitable prostitution industry. You have to transport those vulnerable women to the point where men with money are or can be brought. And so that means that over the centuries, that's why ports, I mean shipping ports, they are the precursors of Dubai as an airline hub. Shanghai, New York, Liverpool, Rotterdam. We're talking about major shipping ports. They are if you will, they're the ancestors of the big new hubs, airline hubs. So Dubai is, in one sense, a new phenomenon. 2 generations ago, Dubai wasn't a big transit hub. So but the ways in which earlier transit hubs operated, what set the playbook for creating a prostitution industry transit point in Dubai. It's not automatic. In fact, one of the things that we should make sure we don't fall into is to think it was easy. And that it always has taken pressure and bribes and intimidation and manipulation and trickery to do it. And so the question would be, can any of the anti-traffic people, can they think of a current big airline hub that does not seem to have become a major prostitution industry transit? And my guess is there are some. And it would be very interesting to know how they stopped it, how they decided, whether it be Seoul or Singapore or Tokyo.
Not Singapore.
Not Singapore. See, there you go. Now remember, Singapore has been a centuries-old shipping port.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the huge new airport that is called the Tokyo airport, but of course it's way outside of Tokyo, but it operates. So it depends who at the beginning of the creation of a hub in Bangkok or where, do they from the start think, well, we want to make this safe for airlines. We want to make it profitable for airlines, but we've learned from shipping ports what we have to do to make sure it doesn't become a sexualized, exploitative hub. And we're going to do X, Y, and Z to make sure it hasn't happened. My guess is that the big, huge new Turkish hub airport, which is deliberately created by Erdogan, the autocratic ruler, to compete with Dubai. I mean, that's what he wants to do. He wants to be Dubai's rival. So it's brand new as well. Has any government officials with advice, have they taken any steps to try and not be a prostitution hub? I mean, I don't know the answer, but that is one, rather than thinking, because if we think it's automatic, prostitution, and this is the way people who aren't curious talk, prostitution's always thrived around the big transit ports. If people say that, they say you don't have to be curious, you don't have to ask anything, and the worst thing, I think, is go on imagining it took no decisions. It took no people doing anything particular. It was just going to happen that way because that's what happens at transit points. Well, that's not true. And to think that is to be so uncurious, to do no investigations to find out how Dubai became what it's become, lets all those perpetrators off the hook. And you and I aren't going to do that.
Yeah, and that relates back to everyone saying, oh, but prostitution is the oldest job in the world. And
as somebody else said, actually pimping is the oldest job. I'm surprised everywhere where I go, where I don't realize there's a local feminist movement. And then the people who invite me introduce me to local feminists. Because in most feminist movements, most women's rights, women's liberation movements are not made visible.
On this subject of activism, as a young scholar, I often feel that there's tension between critique and career building. So within your own trajectory, how did you navigate that? And how would you suggest young feminists navigate those ideas?
Well, I tell you, if you do, if you do really interesting, evidence-based, energetic research, you will get not only a job, you will be respected for the work you do. So for me, I honestly, Lola, I've never felt as if my energy-driven, curiosity-driven research and teaching, because out of this, teaching and research to me just are hand in hand all the time. They're never competing. I learn things from teaching. When I do research, I then make my courses more interesting. I've deliberately made a point of not letting them seem to be rivals. If I teach well, which means students will teach me, then I find new topics for research. If I find new topics for research and then carry out the research, my courses get better. And in the midst of it all, life is good. Careerism is when you try to only get into the heads of the people you think control the job market. Now that's careerism. having a career by itself is not corrupting. Careerism can be corrupting.
When you look back, we spoke a lot about your trajectory in your career. So looking back, what would you tell yourself at the start of your work on women more broadly, on militarism, on tourism, etc.?
Always take diverse women, really wildly diverse women, seriously. Listen really hard. Watch minutely. And always think over the long time. Even if you're interested in a particular, for example, let's take this BBC. This really sounds interesting. This BBC expose. And you want to that's going to be where the spotlight, I'm making this up, where the spotlight of your research came. But always think, how did you get there and what's going to happen? Always think, I'm not trained as an historian, but I'm now absolutely committed to historical consciousness. Nothing ever just happens.
Yeah, and that resonates with me a lot. As I mentioned, I was a history minor, and my history professor in undergrad, he taught me that importance, right? The importance of history and of always contextualizing things. And even if it's a book, right? Understand the moment in time in which a book was written.
Absolutely.
And yeah, these are lessons I definitely carry with me today, and I'm going to keep carrying with me. All right. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. It has been a pleasure speaking with you.
And you've taught me so much. This is great.
Feminist curiosity begins with a deceptively simple demand to take women seriously. Not as symbols, not as data points, not as afterthoughts to quote-unquote real political events, but as central actors whose everyday lives reveal how power actually works. This is the core of Cynthia Enloe's argument in The Curious Feminist, and it is the framework that shapes my own research on sex tourism, gendered labor, and global political economy. Feminist curiosity is a methodology, but it is also a discipline. It forces us to slow down, to notice, and to resist the narratives that institutions want us to accept without questions, such as sex work being work. Enloe invites us to look at the world as if the small, overlooked details, a domestic worker's migration path, a prostituted woman's vulnerability in a tourist district, the silence of a policy document, are the real archives of political life. It makes the personal political. This approach is radical precisely because it challenges what counts as political. Feminist curiosity says that political lives not only in constitutions or treaties, but in hotel rooms, kitchens, massage parlors, border checkpoints, and airport terminals. It lives in the routes women travel, the bodies they inhabit, the labor they perform, and the danger or dignity with which they move through the world. A key part of feminist curiosity is noticing language, not as semantics, but as a political tool. One example that shapes my own research is the shift from the term prostitution to sex work. This change is often framed as progressive, but feminist curiosity urges us to look more closely. Why does the term sex work gain institutional popularity? What does it obscure? And who benefits from a linguistic frame that naturalizes an industry rooted in male demand, uneven employment, militarized economies, racialized desire, and global inequality? When we instead use the language of prostituted women, the causal chain becomes visible. The focus moves away from women's supposed choices and towards the structures that constrain them, like recruitment networks and migration regimes and tourist markets and policing partners. The focus moves away from women's supposed choices and towards the structures that constrain them, like recruitment networks, migration regimes, tourist markets, policing patterns, and economies that commodify female bodies as leisure attractions. Feminist curiosity helps us see that language is never neutral. It can soften violence or expose it. It can individualize exploitation or situate it within global systems of power. Nowhere is feminist curiosity more necessary than in the study of sex tourism. Too often, sex tourism is treated as a cultural quirk or an unfortunate side effect of global travel. But Enloe's approach asks us to look deeper. What political, economic, and gendered forces make certain places into hubs of sexual consumption? In Thailand, in parts of the Dominican Republic, in Cuba, and increasingly in the Gulf, prostitution is not an isolated phenomenon. It is embedded in state development strategies, labor markets, and the international imagination. Tourism operates as a form of global capitalism that relies heavily on women's effective sexual and service labor, even when state officials deny or criminalize its existence. When we apply feminist curiosity to sex tourism, several questions arise. Who is expected to be available to tourists, and why? What forms of racialized femininity are marketed, and to whom? How do global inequalities make certain women's bodies economically necessary yet socially disposable? How do states manage the contradictions between reputation and profit? These questions take sex tourism out of the realm of morality debates and into the realm of political economy, where I believe it belongs. Dubai offers a particularly striking example. The city's global branding relies on luxury, safety, cleanliness, and economic possibility. But feminist curiosity asks us to attend to the women who sustain the image. The migrant service workers, the domestic worker, the hostesses, dancers, masseuses, and prostituted women whose labor is rendered invisible by design. Dubai is not an exception. It is the crystallization of global hierarchies. The sponsorship system, the stratified labor market, and the cultural performance of modernity all obscure the realities of women living in conditions of surveillance, of precarity, and disposability. Feminist curiosity reveals the contradiction at the heart of Dubai's tourism economy. The allure of the city depends on the invisibility of the very women whose labor maintains it. We begin to see that sex tourism is not an aberration. It is stitched into the city's broader ecosystem of service labor. It becomes clear that women's bodies are repositories of global capital, sites where wealth, desire, race, and inequality all converge. Feminist curiosity also crosses borders. When we turn our lens towards Sudan or Myanmar, two contexts shaped by militarization, displacement, and authoritarianism, we see the same methodological principles at work. Traditional political analysis often focuses on military factions, ceasefires, electoral transitions, or diplomatic negotiations. But feminist curiosity asks, what are the women doing? In Sudan, women have been central to the resistance movements, organizing neighborhood committees, sustaining protest networks, performing logistical labor, and taking enormous risks in the face of state violence. Yet, international accounts frequently erase them. In Myanmar, women have resisted militarization not only through direct protest, but also through daily, quiet acts of survival. Educating children, maintaining communication webs, smuggling information, caring for displaced communities, and resisting the junta's attempts to control their bodies and movements. Feminist curiosity reveals that women are not peripheral to political transformation. They are often the engine. What changes is not their participation, but whether we bother to see it. Enloe writes that feminist curiosity begins with noticing that power wants us to overlook. This includes noticing who is allowed to speak and who is spoken for, whose labor is celebrated and whose is extracted, whose stories are documented and whose are dismissed as private or cultural or irrelevant. Power thrives on invisibility, but feminist curiosity makes invisibility impossible. It asks us to pay attention to women cleaning hotels at dawn, the women migrating across borders with debt they cannot repay, the women navigating tourist zones where desire and danger is blurred, the women whose political agency is dismissed because it does not look like the agency of men. It demands we see women not as a symptom of global systems, but as theorists and actors in their own lives. Finally, feminist curiosity is an ethics of courage. It requires asking questions that unsettle comfortable narratives. Is this empowerment, or is it exploitation with better branding? Is it choice or is it survival under constrained conditions? Is it culture or is it inequality dressed up as tradition? Is this work or is it commodification normalized through rhetoric? Feminist curiosity is not cynical, it is hopeful. It believes that knowing more, and knowing more honestly, creates a possibility of doing better. It is a refusal to accept the world as it is presented to us. It is a commitment to uncovering the hidden infrastructures of power that shape women's lives, whether in a massage parlor in Dubai, a bar in Pattaya, a garment factory in Yangon, or a protest line in Khartoum. And curiosity is not soft. It is subversive. It is destabilizing. It is political. Because once you start taking women seriously, the entire architectures of global politics look much different. Cynthia Enloe teaches us that feminist curiosity is a way of seeing, and a way of refusing not to see. It holds that women's lives contain knowledge we cannot afford to ignore. It reveals that the global economy runs on gendered labor that is strategically hidden. It insists that the intimate and the international are inseparable, and it urges us to follow cues that women's stories offer us. These clues that point towards systems of power and towards possibilities for justice. Feminist curiosity does not ask for the perfect answers, but it asks better questions. And in a world built on women's invisibility, asking better questions is a form of liberation.
That was none other than the fantastic WLRN member Lola with her commentary on looking more deeply at language in order to make visible the invisible lives and contributions of women in political life. Thanks for listening to WLRN's 117th edition podcast. WLRN would like to thank our guest this month for sharing her views. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for speaking with us. Until next time, this is Thistle signing off on another WLRN podcast.
For WLRN's edition 117, which focuses on feminist curiosity, I created the background by layering symbols of airplanes flying around the world to suggest the global aspect of the issues. Over that, I used a detail of a surrealist oil painting known as The Call, by the Spanish-Mexican artist Remedios Vero. In her painting, there is a woman in the center with hair flowing up from her head like a flame. That woman has a curious demeanor. She is meant to represent someone awakening to truths. There are other women around her who seem more like they are blending into the sides of a cave-like room. Some of them have their eyes open and some don't. Mixed together, the plain shapes become more like birds in relation to the women or arrows. Grouped together, they are like obstacles to overcome, to get past, to be able to see more clearly what is going on. This is Margaret. Thanks for listening.
And I am Frida. Thanks for tuning in. Next month, we will focus our program on feminist love. That next podcast will be out on Thursday, February 5th. If you'd like to receive our newsletter that notifies you when our podcasts, music shows, and interviews are released, please sign up for our newsletter on the WLRN website. You can also find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, and SoundCloud in addition to the website. Stay strong in the struggle, and thanks for listening.
If you like what you're hearing and would like to donate to the cause of feminist community radio, visit our website to check out our merch and make a donation. If you're interested in joining our team, we're always looking for new volunteers to conduct interviews, write blog posts, post to our social media, and do other tasks that keep us moving forward as a collective of media activist women. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to rate us on your favorite podcast app. This is Anne, signing off for now.
But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that,